I had just driven 6 straight hours through rain and traffic when I pulled into the driveway of the house I shared with my husband, Anderson Prescott. My shoulders ached and my hands were still stiff from gripping the steering wheel. All I wanted was to walk inside and feel safe for a moment. Maybe Anderson would be awake. Maybe he would ask how my trip went. That small hope was what kept me upright as I stepped out of the car. But the house was dark. Every light was off. No porch light, no glow from the windows. The place looked empty, like it had been abandoned. That was the first strange thing. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The air smelled stale, like no one had been there all day. My suitcase wheels echoed loudly across the floor as I dragged it in. Anderson always kept the television on. His mother, Leona, always left a lamp glowing in the living room, but now there was only silence. I called out their names. Anderson? Leona? No one answered. A slow, tight feeling began forming in my chest. Something was wrong. My name is Juliette Vance. I'm 35 years old and I work in corporate finance. I was the one who paid most of the bills in that house. I was the one who kept everything running. And yet, in that moment, standing in the dark living room, I felt like a stranger in my own life. I walked toward the kitchen, hoping to see at least one sign of them. That was when I noticed the white paper sitting on the table, held down by a salt shaker. My heart started beating faster as I reached for it. I had no idea that one small piece of paper was about to destroy everything I thought I knew about my marriage and my family. I picked up the paper and recognized my husband Anderson's messy handwriting immediately. Next to it was the sharp and careful writing of his mother, Leona. They had both signed it as if what they were saying was perfectly normal. The message was short but cold. It said that they needed a vacation to clear their heads. It said they had gone away together and would not be answering their phones. And at the bottom, almost like an afterthought, it said that I should take care of the old woman in the back room. That old woman was Anderson's grandmother, Genevieve Finch. My fingers started to shake as I read the words again. They did not ask how she was doing. They did not leave instructions for food or medicine. They simply walked away and left her behind like a broken piece of furniture. I felt something sharp twist inside my chest. A mix of fear and anger rose up so fast it made me dizzy. Genevieve had suffered a stroke 3 years ago. She could barely walk. Most days she barely spoke. She depended on others for everything, and now she had been left alone. I looked at the time on my phone. It was almost midnight. That meant Anderson and Leona had been gone for nearly 2 full days. 2 days without water, 2 days without food, 2 days without help. I dropped my suitcase and ran down the hallway toward the back room. My legs felt heavy, but my heart was racing. I was terrified of what I might find. As I reached for the door handle, one terrible thought kept repeating in my mind. What if I was already too late? I pushed the door open and a foul smell hit me right away. The room was small and dark with no window open and no fresh air. It smelled like sweat and old sheets and something much worse. My stomach turned. In the center of the room was a narrow bed. On it lay Genevieve Finch. She looked nothing like the woman I remembered. Her skin was dry and pale, her lips were cracked, her chest moved up and down in shallow, uneven breaths. For a moment, I thought she was already gone. I rushed to her side and touched her hand. It was cold, too cold. "Oh my God," I whispered. I ran back to the kitchen, filled a glass with warm water, and grabbed a spoon. I came back and gently lifted her head, sliding small amounts of water between her lips. At first, she did not react. Then she coughed weakly and swallowed. I kept giving her water slowly, afraid of hurting her. Tears streamed down my face as I watched her drink like someone who had crossed a desert. After that, I brought a towel and cleaned her face and hands. I changed her clothes using the cleanest ones I could find. Every movement I made felt urgent and painful. I kept thinking the same thing over and over. How could Anderson do this? How could Leona do this? These were her own family. As I worked, guilt crushed my heart. I had gone on a business trip to earn money for that house, money that paid for Anderson's lifestyle, money that was supposed to help take care of Genevieve. And while I was gone, they had left her to die. I stood up, ready to call for help. She needed a hospital. She needed doctors. She needed someone to save her. That was when her hand suddenly grabbed my wrist. I froze when I felt her grip tighten around my arm. It was not weak. It was firm and steady. I looked down and saw that Genevieve's eyes were open. They were not the empty, unfocused eyes I had grown used to seeing. They were sharp, alert, watching me closely. "Do not take me to the hospital," she said, in a low and clear voice. I felt my heart jump into my throat. For a second, I wondered if I was hallucinating from exhaustion. Genevieve had not spoken a full sentence in years. She pulled my wrist closer. "Help me," she said. "Help me make them pay. They have no idea who I really am." Her voice was calm, but filled with something cold and powerful. I stared at her, unable to move. This was not the frail woman everyone thought was slowly fading away. This was someone fully awake. She told me to lock the door and close the curtains. I did it without thinking, my hands shaking. Then she pointed to the corner of the room, to the old dresser that held her clothes. "Move it," she said. I hesitated, but the look in her eyes made me obey. I pushed the dresser aside and saw a small section of the floor that looked different from the rest. "Lift that board," she said. I bent down and used my house key to pry it open. What I found underneath would change everything. Under the loose floorboard was a narrow, hidden space. Inside it sat a small wooden box, old but carefully polished. It looked completely out of place in that dirty little room. Genevieve told me to bring it to her. My hands were shaking as I lifted the box and placed it on her lap. She opened it with slow but confident fingers. Inside were several small bottles filled with dark liquid and a few strange-looking pills. Without hesitation, she picked up one bottle and drank from it. She did not even use water. I tried to stop her, but she raised her hand. "Just wait," she said. For a few moments, nothing happened. Then her breathing began to change. It became deeper, stronger. Color slowly returned to her face. I watched in disbelief as she sat up on the bed by herself. Her back straightened, her shoulders lifted. The weak and broken woman was disappearing right in front of my eyes. I stepped back, stunned. She looked at me and gave a faint smile. "Thank you," she said. "Now you will see the truth." She stood and walked to the wall. Behind an old calendar was a small hidden switch. When she pressed it, a quiet mechanical sound filled the room. Part of the wall slowly slid open. Behind it was a brightly lit space filled with screens, wires, and control panels. It looked like something from a movie. "This is where I watch everything," she said. I felt my legs go weak as I followed her inside. I was about to learn what really happened in my own house when I wasn't there. The room behind the wall was cold and bright. Several screens covered the far side, each one showing a different part of the house: the living room, the kitchen, the hallway, even the front yard. Genevieve sat in her chair in front of the monitors, like someone who had done this many times before. She clicked a button and one of the screens filled with a recording from earlier that morning. I saw Leona sitting on the couch eating chips and watching television. In the corner of the screen, Genevieve was in her wheelchair, silent and still. Then Leona stood up. Her face was full of irritation. She walked over to Genevieve and kicked the wheelchair hard. I gasped when I saw Genevieve's body jerk from the impact. Leona leaned down and shouted at her. The microphone picked up every word. She called her a useless burden. She cursed her for wasting money. Then she spit on the plate of food and forced it toward her mouth. I covered my face with my hands shaking. Genevieve did not stop the video. She played another one. This time it was Anderson in the living room with a woman I recognized as his so-called cousin, Cassidy. They were sitting close, too close. Anderson laughed and put his arm around her. He told her that once the old woman died, everything would belong to him. He said I was nothing but a paycheck. He said he would throw me out and marry Cassidy. Then Cassidy asked about the medicine he was giving Genevieve. Anderson smiled and said it would slowly make her weaker until she passed away. I felt like my heart was being crushed. All the money I had given Anderson for care and medicine, all the overtime I worked, all of it had been a lie. Genevieve looked at me quietly as I stood there in tears. "Now you understand," she said. "They are not careless. They are killers." Something inside me hardened. I was done being blind. I was done being used, and I was ready to fight back. Genevieve turned off the screens and looked at me with a calm, steady gaze. "What you just saw is only part of the truth," she said. She told me that her weakness and confusion had all been an act. For years, she had pretended to be sick and helpless. She wanted to see who would care for her and who would wait for her to die. Anderson and Leona failed that test in the worst possible way. Then she told me who she really was. Genevieve Finch was not a poor old widow living on a small pension. She was the founder and chairwoman of a powerful financial group that controlled banks, real estate, and investment firms across several states. Everything Anderson thought he owned was only there because she allowed it. The house, his job, the money, even the car he drove, all of it belonged to her. I could barely breathe as I listened. The fragile grandmother I had been bathing and feeding was actually one of the most powerful women in the city. She reached for my hand. "You were the only one who treated me like a human being," she said. "That is why I trust you." Her voice softened for the first time. "I want you to help me finish this," she said. "They tried to kill me. They tried to use you. Now it is time they face the truth." I wiped my tears and nodded. For the first time in years, I did not feel weak. I felt strong. Within an hour, Genevieve had made a single phone call, not to Anderson, not to Leona, but to someone who answered her with respect. By dawn, a man named Bennett Cross arrived at the house. He was dressed in a sharp, dark suit and carried a leather case. He introduced himself as Genevieve's personal attorney. The moment he saw her standing and fully alert, he bowed slightly. "We have much to do, Chairwoman Finch," he said. From that moment on, everything moved fast. Bennett made phone calls, teams arrived, workers began removing Anderson and Leona's furniture from the house. Their clothes, their junk, everything that did not belong to Genevieve was taken out. New furniture was brought in. Clean walls, bright lights, the house began to look completely different, like it was waking up after years of being asleep. Genevieve sat in the center of it all, giving quiet instructions. She looked powerful and calm. Bennett explained to me that legally the house was not in Anderson's name. It belonged to a foundation Genevieve controlled. Anderson and Leona had no rights to it at all. That meant they had nowhere to return to. My phone buzzed. Genevieve nodded toward it. "It is time to invite them back," she said. With shaking hands, I typed a message to Anderson. I told him that Genevieve was not breathing, that her body was cold, that I was scared and did not know what to do. Then I pressed send. We waited in silence, watching the phone. We all knew he would answer, and we all knew his answer would seal his fate. It did not take long. My phone vibrated on the table. I picked it up and opened the message while Bennett and Genevieve watched. Anderson wrote that I should not panic. He told me not to call anyone, not the neighbors, not the police, not an ambulance. "Just wrap her in a sheet and leave her in the back room," he wrote. "I will deal with it later. I am busy right now." There was no sadness in his words, no shock, no concern, only inconvenience. I read the message out loud. Bennett's face tightened in disgust. Genevieve closed her eyes for a brief moment, then opened them again, cold and steady. That was all we needed. I replied to Anderson with a simple message. "All right, I will take care of everything here." Then I put the phone down. The trap was now complete. They believed they had won. They had no idea they were walking straight into their own destruction. That night, the house was completely dark again. The new furniture, the polished floors, the elegant curtains were all hidden in shadow. Only a few small lights glowed quietly in the corners. Genevieve sat in a tall armchair in the living room. She looked nothing like the sick old woman they had left behind. She was dressed in a simple but elegant suit, her silver hair neatly styled. Bennett stood nearby, calm and silent. I sat beside her, my heart beating fast. We heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway, then voices. Anderson, Leona, and Cassidy. They were laughing, complaining about the long drive, talking about food and showers. The front door opened. Anderson stepped inside first, dragging his suitcase. Leona followed, then Cassidy. The room was still dark. "Juliette?" Anderson called. "Why is it so dark in here? Where are you?" I did not answer. He found the light switch and flipped it on. The crystal chandelier lit up the entire room. They froze. Their eyes moved across the shining floors, the new furniture, the elegant curtains, and finally to the center of the room. Genevieve sat there calmly, holding a cup of tea. Two large men in black suits stood behind her. Leona screamed and dropped her bags. Cassidy stepped back in shock. Anderson's face turned pale. "Grandma?" he whispered. "What is this?" Genevieve slowly placed her cup down. "If I were really dead," she said, "you would already be rich. But here I am." Anderson turned to me in panic. "Juliette, what did you do? What is going on?" I stepped forward. "You are standing in a house that does not belong to you anymore," I said. "You never owned anything here." Bennett walked out of the shadows with a folder in his hands. "Good evening, Mr. Prescott," he said. "Allow me to explain your situation." Their vacation had just turned into their worst nightmare. Bennett opened the folder and began to speak in a calm, professional voice. He explained that Genevieve Finch was the legal owner of the house, the land, and the company where Anderson worked. Anderson had only been given his job because of her kindness. Anderson tried to laugh it off, but his hands were shaking. Then Bennett told him that his accounts had already been frozen, his company had terminated his employment, his credit cards were canceled. Anderson pulled out his phone and stared at the screen in disbelief as notification after notification appeared. Fired, account frozen, access denied. Leona began to cry. Cassidy slowly stepped away from Anderson. Genevieve watched them without emotion. "You left me to die," she said. "You poisoned me. You stole from me. Now you will face the consequences." The door to the side of the room opened. Police officers walked in. Anderson dropped to his knees. Leona screamed. Cassidy tried to run, but a guard blocked her path. The officers read their rights and placed handcuffs on Anderson and Leona. Cassidy was taken as an accomplice. I watched as the people who had ruined my life were led away. For the first time in years, I felt free. Their lies were over, their power was gone, and the truth had finally caught up with them. 3 months later, the world looked very different for all of us. Anderson and Leona were no longer living in that comfortable house. They had no money, no car, and no one willing to help them. Their faces appeared in the local news as suspects in a local news as suspects in an elder abuse and financial crime case. They were released on bail while waiting for trial, but their lives had already collapsed. I saw them one afternoon while driving through the city. They were sitting on cardboard outside a closed store, wearing dirty clothes and arguing over a small box of leftover food. They looked older and weaker, nothing like the people who once controlled my life. Anderson saw my car and tried to chase after me. He shouted my name and begged for forgiveness. I did not stop. I did not look back. The woman who once cried herself to sleep was gone. In her place was someone who finally knew her worth. Sometimes justice does not come slowly. Sometimes it comes all at once and changes everything.
1 year later, the judge finally delivered the verdict. Anderson was sentenced to 12 years in prison for attempted murder, elder abuse, and financial crimes. Leona received 10 years for her role in poisoning and neglect. Cassidy, who had testified against them, avoided a long sentence but lost everything she had. I did not feel joy when I heard the verdict. I felt something quieter and deeper: closure. Genevieve Finch was now living peacefully in a beautiful home surrounded by people who actually cared about her. Her health had improved, not because of medicine, but because she was finally safe. I had taken over leadership of her foundation, which helped abandoned seniors and struggling families. I was no longer just surviving, I was building something meaningful. The pain of the past had not disappeared, but it no longer controlled me. Some wounds turn into wisdom. Some betrayals turn into strength, and some endings are really new beginnings. Genevieve and I often sit together in the garden now, drinking tea and watching the sunlight move across the flowers. Sometimes she tells me stories about her youth. Sometimes we sit in silence. Both feel just as peaceful. One afternoon, she took my hand and thanked me for coming back that night. She said that if I had not returned when I did, her story would have ended very differently. I told her the truth, that helping her had also saved me. It showed me that kindness is not weakness, it is power, real power. For anyone listening who feels trapped in a toxic family or a painful relationship, remember this: you are not powerless, you are not invisible, and you deserve respect.